What's up, everybody? Here for our emergency post North London Derby recap. Obviously, this game had gotten so much hype for months at this point. It just always felt like as these teams went back and forth in the battle for fourth, it was leading to this moment that nothing was going to be decided until these two teams met on May 12th, till you had that second North London Derby. And while the hype was certainly justified, and the situation we found ourselves in heading into this game justified all of the build up to it. That was an incredibly anticlimactic way for this to all play out. Not only do Spurs win 3-0 and get the most lopsided North London derby since 2012, they do so in a fashion that, particularly because of the way Arsenal handled themselves in this game, there was just no disputing the outcome. There were no questions from, in the first half, basically, and certainly after Son added the third at the beginning of the second half. It was very much going through the motions. Who can we take off the field? Who can we, can we get Joe Rodon some minutes? That's what we were talking about in the second half of the second half, that final quarter of the game. And it all starts with a questionable penalty called on Cedric by Paul Tierney. And this is one of those situations where VAR worked exactly the way I want it to. Cedric gave Paul Tierney that option by doing something that, as Lee Dixon pointed out in the commentary, would have been a foul at midfield. I am a staunch advocate of we need to have some rules inside the box. I strongly dislike the it's inside the box, so we're just going to let guys kind of rustle, and you see somebody get tackled on a corner kick and VAR waves it off. That bothers me to no end. Now, yes, you got to use some judgment and have some context and some perspective, because we also don't need 5 penalties being called every game. But this was absolutely a judgment call. It could have gone either way. There's an argument it wasn't a penalty. There's certainly an argument that Paul Tierney was justified in calling it, or at least that you can't just sort of dismiss this as nothing. So he ends up calling it. Harry Kane converts. It's 1-0. Here we go. Exactly the start as a neutral you want. You want the team that absolutely has to win up, the team that benefits most from a draw going a goal down. This was setting up perfectly, because Arsenal were going to have to respond. The response was, Rob Holding getting sent off. And boy, did he earn these yellow cards. The first one, he absolutely got his money's worth. From the very beginning, he was struggling to deal with Son and was up to some shenanigans that he didn't actually get yellow carded for. But Paul Tierney made it very clear when he handed him the yellow is for persistent infringement, because he got a talking to after, I think it was the second little altercation they had, and then he went and committed another foul on Son and got the yellow. And certainly Rob Holding is not the first defender that's had a difficult time trying to handle Son and being in that position against Spurs. That's why Son's up to now 21 goals in the Premier League this season. He's a phenomenal player, and he is incredibly, incredibly quick. Holding just also seemed to want to try and bother him as much and be petulant, the way he was sort of handling all of that post play, off the ball shenanigans. But anyways, he gets a deserved yellow. And then a few minutes after that proceeds to elbow Son, who's trying to cut across and make a run into the box, in the chest/head. Certainly made contact with the head, which is a yellow card. And so it goes to the same larger point that was the downfall of Arsenal in this game. just like Cedric opened up that possibility of Paul Tierney calling the penalty by making no play on the ball whatsoever and just kind of shoving Son and running into his back. Rob Holding, by getting himself an unnecessary yellow card so early in the game, now puts himself in dangerous territory when he does something like that. And it wasn't even a question of, he was trying to make the argument it was his shoulder. Certainly didn't look like it. But even if it's accidental, right? Maybe he didn't try and go that high or something. If you don't have your yellow, you're okay. But when you start using your elbow on a yellow card, this is the kind of stuff that happens. So 33 minutes in, Arsenal are down a man and a goal. It's the same thing Leeds have been failing to do the last couple of weeks. Is you go down that goal early, the absolute last thing you can do is go get somebody sent off. If you go down 2 goals, okay. Certainly not ideal, but with the way Arsenal attack and the talent they have, you can find a way to get 2 goals back. But now you're trying to play, 60 or so minutes with stoppage time, down a man, already trailing, against a team that's going to have no problem continuing to put pressure on the net. They're not just trying to see this out. Goal difference is going to potentially matter at the end, and this is North London derby. Spurs are going to try and add some more goals. The timing of these red cards is so important. If you've got to make that, you feel like you have to make that play to stop Son from darting in the 85th minute, okay, that's a different conversation. To do it in the first half, put your team in an awful spot. And then promptly Harry Kane adds a second. Spurs come out of halftime, Son gets the third, and it's over. And so by the end of this game, we're not even talking about Christian Romero missing out through injury. That was a non-factor. To add to the problems Arsenal already have now, Gabriel comes off with an injury that very well could be a factor. And so just in about every way possible, this is a worst case scenario for Mikel Arteta. You got to just go regroup. There's still a point up. That was the one blessing you had coming into this game if you're Arsenal. It was impossible for you to lose control of this race. 538 now has it up at a 47% chance of Spurs getting fourth. This is still shaded toward Arsenal simply because Arsenal have 2 games. And if they get 6 points from those 2 games, they're going to the Champions League next year. The other important context that now gets added to this conversation, because Spurs did win this game and because their goal difference is now at a point where it's basically unreachable, barring a miracle for Arsenal, is now we have to look at, okay, what do we have with these last 2 games? Tottenham host Burnley, a team that, yes, has everything to play for. Also a team, if you're going to make the Champions League, you got to win that game. It's one of those, if you can't find a way to get it done, Arsenal deserve to be the ones who go into the Champions League and finish 4th. Now, granted, you could make the same the reverse argument about Arsenal in this game, that the decisions they made do not justify Champions League place. But that's where we are with these two teams. It's just kind of back and forth. They both had really good moments and both had really bad moments. So Spurs host Burnley and then finish at Norwich. A game again. Absolutely no excuse to lose that one. That's a team that's already been relegated. That's a team you are far superior than. On the flip side, Arsenal go to Newcastle, who are seemingly playing every Big Six club in a row here. But a Newcastle team that is playing well, that from a what you have to play for standpoint, it's not the same situation as being in a relegation battle or a title race or a top 4 race. But as a team trying to build toward next season, and it's been so good since the calendar turned to 2022, that is still a very difficult place to go, and a team that is going to want to finish the season strong. Some teams are just kind of ready for it to be over. I don't put Newcastle in that category. And then to finish it off, Arsenal host Everton, who it certainly looks like are going to still be fighting for their Premier League lives at that point. We will see how everything plays out, but that is certainly not an ideal game to end with when your direct opponent here is getting to play Norwich City. So here we are. 1 point. Spurs are going to win the tiebreaker, barring something incredible happening. And now it's up to Mikel Arteta and Arsenal. How are you going to respond? This has been an up and down season. Certainly much, much more bad than good. Sorry, much more good than bad. But you know, the very, very poor start. That 3-game losing streak before they went and beat teams that were much better than the teams they just lost to get back in control of this top 4 race. The one thing I've been consistent on, though, is every time you felt like Arsenal were on the verge of collapsing and sort of on the verge of relative disaster and the season falling apart, they have responded emphatically. And they've gotten up off the ground and continued to fight. I give Arteta all the credit in the world for that. They only have to do it one more time. So we're going to see if they can do it. If I have to pick, I'm going to say they do. I don't feel good about it, to be quite honest. But it's 2 games, and they are better than the teams they're playing. They don't have to go play City. They don't have to go play Liverpool. They don't have to go play Chelsea. It's Newcastle and Everton. Certainly more difficult than what Spurs have, but it is doable. And I believe in Arteta's resilience that has permeated into this team. They certainly didn't show it today. But it was one of those games where everything that could go wrong possibly did, and the minute you're down a goal, or at least 2 goals and down a man, you're thinking about the next game, right? This is not about trying to make a comeback against Spurs. This is about trying to move on as quick as possible, address whatever needs to be addressed, and just sort of turn the page to get ready for Newcastle. Gabriel's injury then adds another blow. We'll see how that ultimately plays out, if he is done for the season, if he's available for these last 2 games. But this is it's sort of fitting. This is how it all played out. This is what Arteta has been building to since the moment he got at Arsenal. It's that thing I continue to stress about. Can you change the sort of the DNA and the culture of a club? Because what Arsenal have been able to do this season, and their ability to respond from those really, really low points, is not the Arsenal we have come to know in the past decade or so. He has changed so much within the identity of that club and the narrative surrounding it. That's really the word I like to use when we're talking about this, is the narrative. How do people perceive the team? And it is changing. It doesn't change overnight. And for a team that expects to be in the Champions League that hasn't in the past half decade, it takes time. Especially when you've got your Chelseas and Cities and Liverpools to deal with. Now we're going to see just how close they are to getting where they want to be from a cultural standpoint. Because it is still completely up to them. If they don't do this, this is the game you're going to look back at. because mentally they just capitulated. They were not able to control their emotions from the very very beginning. And in a derby like this, in a game with these stakes, that is often the defining factor, and it certainly was in this game. But again, the good news is it's not. Not only is it not over, it is still all within your control. Spurs still have to win those two games. They have to beat a team fighting for their Premier League lives. That matters. And even if Spurs do win those two games, Arsenal can still render it irrelevant by winning their two. It is set up to be an incredible and fitting ending as these two teams went back and forth as they're kind of trying to reestablish themselves as that fourth team behind Liverpool, City, and Chelsea in the Premier League. So ultimately, there's not too much to say about the game itself. There were the dramatic moments that decided it in the first half. Really, the red card and the second goal were what took out any question of how it was going to go. Spurs had the third. That goal difference could come up to be decisive. Could not matter at all, depending on how these last two games play out. So we will have to see what happens next. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with our weekend roundup on Monday morning and then our live show again Wednesday night.